Public Administration 101. Proudly brought to you by Carno Consultants. For professional advice you can trust. This video is a follow-up on a previous video we did, where we discussed the definitions and basics of unauthorized, irregular, and fruitless and wasteful expenditure. If you want to know more about that video, please check it out under the Public Administration 101 playlist on our channel. While you are there, be sure to check out some of our other videos on this series of Public Administration 101. And remember to subscribe to this channel for more videos. And don't forget to turn on the notification button to be alerted about new videos. Now let us get into today's video. In this video, we will be covering what happens when a government institution or a government official discovers unauthorized, irregular, and fruitless and wasteful expenditure. Basically, we will be dealing with how unauthorized, irregular, and fruitless and wasteful expenditure should be treated by public officials. However, we must first state that the South African Municipal Finance Management Act, otherwise known as the MFMA, as well as the South African Public Finance Management Act, referred to as the PFMA, requires that each public official who is responsible for financial management within the public sector must take all reasonable steps within their individual area of responsibility to ensure that any irregular expenditure, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure, as well as other losses, are prevented. Let us recap on what is meant by unauthorized, irregular, and fruitless and wasteful expenditure. Unauthorized expenditure is any expenditure incurred by the government institution which was not in accordance with the approved budget. And this includes overspending of the amount approved in the budget. While an irregular expenditure would be regarded as any expenditure incurred by the government entity which does not comply with legislation, policy, or any set rules. And lastly, an expenditure will be considered fruitless and wasteful if it was made in vain and would have been avoided had reasonable care been exercised. It is clear that all government purchases and all government spending must comply with policies and legislation and are correctly approved. If this is not done, any government official responsible for such unauthorized, irregular, and fruitless and wasteful expenditure may be held personally responsible and accountable. It is therefore important that any unauthorized, irregular, and fruitless and wasteful expenditure should be investigated. This will ensure that consequences, such as disciplinary action and criminal sanctions, may be imposed. As indicated, any government official who becomes aware of the occurrence of any unauthorized, irregular, or fruitless and wasteful expenditure should immediately report particulars of such expenditure to the accounting officer. Upon identification, such expenditure must be left in the expense account until after investigation. The accounting officer, or the person delegated with such task, must record the details of the expenditure in the relevant internal register. The accounting officer, or the executive authority, must assign someone to investigate the matter without delay, in order to determine the validity of the alleged expenditure, and whether such expenditure can be recovered from the liable official or political office bearer, and ascertain the responsible person to be held accountable. After investigation, the accounting officer must report such expenditure to the executive authority, such as the mayor, and the council, and the MEC for local government in the province in the case of the municipality. In the provincial government, such expenditure must be reported to the MEC responsible, or the Premier. Under the national departments, the accounting officer is required to report it to the Minister. While at state-owned entities, such expenditure will be reported to the Board of Directors. As indicated, the reporting must indicate details of the expenditure, as well as any steps that have been taken to recover the expenditure, and other measures put in place to prevent any reoccurrence of such incidents. In the case where an irregular expenditure has been declared as irrecoverable, such expenditure may be written off by the appropriate level of executive authority. In other words, writing off an irregular expenditure should not be a primary response, but must only take place after an investigation and after being confirmed as not recoverable. Where the investigation reveals that the political office bearer, or the official responsible for the irregular expenditure, did not act in good faith, then the executive authority, or the accounting officer must consider instituting disciplinary action, or criminal charges, against such person. In some instances, the accounting officer may ratify any minor breaches in the procurement processes, provided that such power and delegation to ratify is provided for in the policies of the organization. The law also allows for the National Treasury to condone non-compliance of an irregular expenditure. This can only be done after receiving a detailed motivation as to why the irregular expenditure in question should be considered for condonation, along with any steps that have been taken to avoid a recurrence of the irregular expenditure. It is also a legal requirement that uncovered irregular, fruitless and wasteful, as well as unauthorized expenditure, must be reported to the Auditor General. Such expenditure must also be disclosed in the financial statements of the government institution responsible. The annual financial statements must also disclose particulars of any criminal sanctions or disciplinary steps undertaken as a result of such unauthorized, irregular, or fruitless and wasteful expenditures. The accounting officer is further required to keep a record of any deviations to the regulations, and then disclose these deviations in the annual financial statements, as well as any reasons for such deviations. In summary, public officials must take all reasonable steps to ensure that unauthorized, irregular, and fruitless and wasteful expenditure and other losses are prevented. Where such expenditure has been identified, it must be appropriately investigated. And after investigation, appropriate action must then be taken. This action may include disciplinary action or criminal sanctions. This has been yet another lesson in public administration, proudly brought to you by Kano Consultants. For professional advice you can trust. As always, remember to subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. And don't forget to follow us on social media @Consult Kano.